I have chosen to read from Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, 17th chapter. The reason why I chose this is because we've been gathering and reading. We started to read this section, and then the situation with this coronavirus has prevented us from continuing to read this together, so I decided to read it alone. So I'll be reading translations and commentaries or purports by Srila Prabhupada, and then giving some of my own commentaries. So, first canto Srimad Bhagavatam, 17th chapter, entitled Punishment and Reward of Kali. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prashta Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vikasha Swami Nitinamine. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prashta Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nitinamine. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Text 1. Sutta Goswami said, after reaching that place, Maharaj Parikshit observed that a lower caste Shudra dressed like a king was beating a cow and a bull with a club, as if they had no owner. The situation here is that King Parikshit, as per his dharma or duty, he traveled this country to make sure that no evil was going on. And so he comes upon a scene where a dark, menacing-looking person was dressed like a king. And while being dressed as a king, he was beating a cow and a bull with a club. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The principal sign of the age of Kali is that lower caste Shudras, in other words, men without Brahminical culture and spiritual initiation, will be dressed like administrators or kings, and the principal business of such non-Kshatriya rulers will be to kill the innocent animals, especially the cows and the bulls, who shall be unprotected by their masters, the bona fide Vaishyas, the mercantile community. In the Bhagavad Gita 1844, it is said that the Vaishyas are meant to deal in agriculture, cow protection, and trade. In the age of Kali, the degraded Vaishyas, the mercantile men, are engaged in supplying cows to slaughterhouses. The Kshatriyas are meant to protect the citizens of the state, whereas the Vaishyas are meant to protect the cows and bulls and utilize them to produce grains and milk. The cow is meant to deliver milk, and the bull is meant to produce grains. But in the age of Kali, the Shudra class of men are in the posts of administrators, and the cows and bulls are the mothers and the fathers, unprotected by the Vaishyas, are subjected to the slaughterhouses organized by the Shudra administration. So in the verse itself, it is stated that this low-class person, that's one thing. Low-class person dressed as a king, that's one thing. And then the other thing is that he was beating the cow and the bull with a club. And the third thing is that it was doing that as if they had no owner. Owner here means a protector. Ownership, according to this Vedic or Hare Krishna concept, is that the owner has a tremendous moral responsibility. In other words, the owner is the protector. Owner is the protector, and it's unimaginable that an owner or a protector would be abusing the one who is supposed to protect. So let's start from the beginning. First, there was a low-class person. So what's a low-class person? That's a person with no culture. And what is the culture? Well, the culture is, it's a lot. But at least to boil it down to the scope of this discussion, the culture here refers to certain elements of culture, such as morality. Spiritual purity means moral purity. Moral means basic differentiation between good and evil. So, good. Spiritual science is meant to realize the ultimate good. And so, low-class person is a person that's basically not good. It's got issues with evil. And so here we have a low-class person. So not necessarily socially low class, like a lower class, lower tier of a society, but a low class in terms of lack of moral qualities or lack of spiritual purity. And so that's the low-class person. And now, interesting thing is that this low-class person is dressed as a king. So king is a person in the position of power. And one who has power is sort of like the owner. That's just what the power does. That's one of the reasons why people seek power, because power gives you ownership. But in the mind or the consciousness of a materialist, a spiritually ill person, they think that this ownership is intrinsic, that this ownership is basic, that this ownership is the foundation of their existence, and so that's the illusion, because we don't own anything. We just come anywhere. We come here for a while, and we get the opportunity to use things, but we're never owners. We're here for a while, and then we move on. We die or whatever. Even before we die, things come to our possession and leave our possession. So intrinsically, we're not owners of anything. So people of this world, materialists, they spiritually sick people, they seek power in order to realize ownership. However, power is not an evil thing by itself. As a matter of fact, power is a great thing. It's another energy of God, another energy of Krishna, so it's good. But the question is, how do we use this power? And so when one finds himself in the position of the power, such a person has a great responsibility to serve and protect. And in general, in terms of the ultimate good, and very specifically in terms of their specific dharma or their specific duty. Like a police officer has a very specific duty. A king, in this case, has a very specific duty. So here we have a low-class person dressed as a king. So he appears as a position in power. He appears as a person in the position of ownership, and yet he is exploiting. And this is just horrible. It's hard to imagine anything more horrible. There are more horrible things, but this is really, really horrific. And this is the age of Kali, the age that we live in. It's characterized by this mentality by this attitude, by this terrible lack of spiritual health, where a person wants to own and enjoy selfishly instead of accept responsibilities and serve. So, low-class person in the garb of a king. And I guess the times we live in, we're so used to it that we don't even notice it. But it's really everywhere. It's going on everywhere. I mean, any insignificant person comes in the position of power and immediately abuses it, or stealing money, stealing resources, or feeding false egos, and the list goes on. Now, what's interesting here is that in this age of Kali, we hardly ever even think to protect the animals. I mean, we're so ready to abuse people. Apparently living beings of the highest conscious potentials. I specifically said potentials because not that many people use their cognitive potentials or their spiritual potentials ultimately. We're so abusive towards humans, we hardly ever remember animals. But animals are also conscious beings, and as it is horrible for anyone to abuse any human, it is also quite disgusting to be abusive towards other persons, towards other beings, animals, plants, etc. That is the message here. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada says how in the Vedic concept of social organization, there are different social classes, and all of these classes have their responsibility, and each of them have a primary responsibility, namely to serve. So one of the most basic realizations of God in the Vedic tradition is to see the society as the body of God. And in this, where different sections of the society are different parts of God, like the legs, the trunk, the arms, the head. And every part is meant to serve the whole. However, in the age of Kali, first of all, even though these social divisions always exist, have always existed, they exist right now and are going to continue to exist whether we recognize them or not, such as the intellectuals, the politicians, the craftspeople, etc., etc. These are classes that have always existed, are existing, and are going to continue to exist. So whether we recognize them or not, the claim of the Vaishnava tradition, Hare Krishna tradition, the tradition of the Srimad Bhagavatam, is that their duty is God-given. God-given means that it's ultimately natural. In other words, when this world was created, it was created for a purpose, and these social classes that always exist have a purpose and a duty which is beyond their ability to choose. In other words, You have no choice. This has been chosen for you. And we see this. We always have the responsibility to serve. It's a moral responsibility. And whatever situation, social situation we find ourselves in, we cannot say, no, I don't want to be moral anymore. Because the moment you say this, the moment you renounce this responsibility, you become immoral. In other words, you become evil. So that's why Vedic concept of these duties, that they're God-given, that they're ultimately natural, that they come as you were born, as the things are created, as the world is created, these duties come along. And therefore they cannot be ignored. Okay, one last thing for the end, and this is that in this age of Kali, these low-class people, in other words, people with no spiritual or moral, there are no spiritual or moral requirements for a person to become a politician. There are, but very few, and we know throughout history, as relatively modern history, that people in leadership positions behaved abominably, in other words, immorally, and they still kept their offices. So in this age of Kali, in order to be given an office, people are screened, but people are, from them, the only thing that's demanded is the proficiency at the craft. There's no demand. There are no spiritual or moral standards demands that the person fits a certain spiritual or moral profile, that the person has a certain spiritual or moral qualities developed. They're just not very important in the age that we live in. Okay, so much about text 1. Text 2 the next day. Hare Krishna.